Welcome, Alex Munyai from ESTECO. So we are not at the Hanover Fair this time, so it's a shame, but still we are in contact, and with the CAE online format, we want to show the people what we could have seen at the Hanover Fair at the CAE-Forum community stand. So, Alex, welcome, and could you tell us what we would have seen in the Hanover Fair at your desk? What is ESTECO going to present? What is in the portfolio of ESTECO?
Okay, thank you very much, Doug, for the introduction. So, well, this is Alex Munyai. I am actually Business Development Manager at ESTECO. And the plan for me was and is to present actually an activity related to smart cities. So it's all related basically, the title of the presentation I had was a journey from big data to the validation of self-driving vehicles. And the reasoning behind is actually smart cities. Basically in my presentation, I wanted first to start with a small introduction of what the ESTECO company is all about. Then afterwards addressing smart cities and explaining how the ESTECO technologies could or can actually support companies in first handling all the huge amount of data that smart cities or systems in general are addressing, and at second also how basically our technologies can also support the let me say validation of self-driving vehicles, which starts really in handling all the big data and then proposing a way with all the algorithms that we have available in our softwares, basically proposing a way to identify most relevant scenarios for the validation of validation and homologation of autonomous vehicles. Okay, so this is actually the plan. I will share actually some presentation slides in order for you to understand what I was basically referring to. And in the presentation, you will see actually some parts in relation to basically what ESTECO is all about. So ESTECO, as I said, is an Italian-based company out of Trieste, and it's an independent software provider specialized in optimization and simulation data management. Well, what do we do? Basically, we propose actually technologies that allow people to not only optimize, but also, let's say, automate processes and also handle large amount of data amongst different people. As such, actually, the scope is that we want to support engineers to allow them develop future products, not necessarily, yeah, why not? Futuristic, let's say, but also make sure that we go beyond actually the traditional ways of working. So the idea is that our technologies allow people to basically investigate designs that they would not think of simply because the combinations of parameters to be considered would be too large. And for this, actually, we have actually two platforms. We have two platforms, one called ModFrontier, which is a desktop platform. This is actually our multidisciplinary optimization software package, as well as we have a web platform called Volta, which allow people to share project, share data. It is basically a simulation data management tool combined with a collaborative optimization platform. Okay, so what did I want to talk to you today about? Smart cities and mobility. So at first, what is a smart city? This is actually often a question that people are addressing. So the problem is that by 2030, basically, there are many studies indicating that more than half of the world population will live in urban areas. And basically, when we consider the complete surface which is available where we could live into, that would mean that more than 50% or let's say here 60% of the population will live in a surface which is basically 10% of the complete available surface. So you can imagine there would be way too many people. This would lead, actually, if we continue, let's say, using the energy in the way we are today, lead to further climate change. The environmental quality would be really very bad. And one of the simple challenge would be, how can we make the energy accessible to all of these people? So the idea of the smart city is actually to address all these items. And it's difficult to find actually proper definitions of it. And actually, I simply looked over the internet, and actually I think one which is simple enough for everybody to understand comes from Wikipedia, which says that a smart city is an urban area which uses different type of electronic sensors. So sensors that will send data. So that's typically what we also refer to as Internet of Things. And all these sensors will send data. These data will be collected, and then basically through a number of algorithms, which we also propose within the ESTECO technologies, we are able to derive tendencies or things out of it. Yeah, and that's actually typically the big data issue, because all these sensors will generate a huge amount of data. And then what do we do with this data, and how do we deal with it? Now, as such, actually, smart cities, when they have actually a lot of these electronics and they generate all the data, they will be able basically to address a number of topics in relation to transport, as you see here in the slide in the picture, smart mobility, in respect to safety, to energy, health, and basically, smart buildings. But what is important is that a smart city is not just one of them, but it has to be a combination of all these parameters, because you can imagine that you can have smart vehicles around, most likely being electric, but you also need to make sure that you have the proper energy supply in order to basically power these vehicles anywhere within the city. So there is actually a combination of all these parameters that will be required. Now, as far as smart mobility, the idea is that we want to provide innovative ways of transport. Okay, the idea is to reduce the traffic congestion, increase safety, and make smarter way of using the transport network. Now, this might sound actually crazy, because you might think, oh, so we want less vehicles, and all these automotive companies all want actually to be more successful. So these two things can be considered as, let me say, conflicting with each other, especially when you look at today's ways of doing business, meaning the OEM develops a vehicle, the vehicle is sold to a private person, so typically people like ourselves, and then we use the car around and we take advantage of, let's say, their garage network for the servicing and so on and so forth. Well, the truth is that the future might be very different, also on a business standpoint, meaning that end users might not own the vehicles anymore, but they will be renting a service directly from the OEM, meaning the auto manufacturers. In the same way as today, you basically rent a service from an airliner to fly from point A to point B. So how many people know precisely the type of airplane you get into when you take an airplane, let me say, from Amsterdam to Hamburg? Well, typically what you know, what you might really know very well is the airliner you're flying with. Would it be Lufthansa, KLM, or any other company? Eventually, the brand of the airplane, if you really pay attention, but the type of airplane, that might be very difficult. And the same thing might take place with the OEMs in the future. You might know that it's going to be a vehicle from a given OEM. You might know it's an electric car, but which type of car precisely? Well, maybe not, simply because you will be on an app at home deciding tomorrow I need to go from point A to point B, and you will make a choice on this type of vehicle size, like if you were renting a car, really. Yeah? The only difference is that you would live in an environment where there are limited parking spaces. Maybe the vehicle will come autonomously in front of your doorstep, and from there, you will either drive autonomously or drive yourself the vehicle to go to the location you want to go to. And this is basically the type of mindset we are looking into. So the challenge that we have is really, when we look at autonomous vehicles, one of the key questions is really, how do I bloody homologate the vehicle? How do I make sure that it can drive? There are two challenges. First, a technical challenge, how to do this effectively, how to guarantee that it's going to work well. And the second challenge is really, how do I make sure that the legal authorities will grant me the permission to do so? Okay. And what we have done is actually built a framework in which people, based on test data, as you can see from here, will generate a huge amount of data, because the vehicles are driving around. The vehicles have actually a lot of test data, but also cities have a lot of data available, which are recording basically the behavior in junctions or in crucial points of the city. All this data is taken, processed, through basically machine learning algorithms that we make available. And from there, we will identify basically scenarios and scenario parameters which are relevant. Within then the Mod Frontier platform, these scenarios are combined together with all the parameters that go together with it, and virtual critical scenarios can be identified. Once the virtual critical scenarios are identified, we can then decide, okay, if I want actually a certain type of ADAS function or autonomous driving function, how many sensors and which sensors am I going to use, and where am I going to place them into the vehicle in order to have optimal performance? And this is actually a process which basically started to prove to work. We have been applying it with a number of OEMs at the moment, and we know that this process is also very much in line with what is being proposed within basically different European initiatives. You can think about Move in France, you can think about Pegasus in Germany. There is also Streetwise and Streetproof, which is being proposed by TNO in the Netherlands, and many more. But they all lead to take test data, process the test data with machine learning algorithms, identify, let's say, scenarios which are relevant in order to validate basically the vehicle. Of course, in this process, it's not just a technical matter, it's also a legal matter where you need actually to involve the legal authorities in order to make sure that things are really well understood also by them, so that they can basically legiferate and make it possible for OEMs to homologate a vehicle, also with the use of virtual tools. For this, obviously, we use the best-in-class algorithms that we make available within Mod Frontier. I will not spend too much time of this. I mean, it could take us hours to go through some of them, but we have basically all the most known algorithms related to machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networks, genetic algorithms. Basically, our algorithms are being combined within our platforms. So within the studies, these algorithms are combined together, and we manage then to identify very quickly, let me say, the scenarios that are more relevant for the validation of our system. So I was then going to close the presentation, showing that, yeah, the method indeed has been applied at a number of automotive manufacturers and proved to work well. The data analysis is not limited, obviously, to vehicle sensors. I mentioned about smart cities. So, of course, because I am in the mobility world, I'm proposing this to the automotive industry. But you could also use it actually to process infrastructure data, obviously, which is useful for the mobility part, but you could also think of processing data coming from hospitals, coming from buildings. We are actually, unfortunately, suffering a lot because of this COVID crisis or pandemic. And one of the challenges that, for example, hospitals are facing is that often they start the pandemic with a given infrastructure, and of course the infrastructure would need to evolve. And actually, analyzing data, on recording data, understanding how people use currently a hospital and would be using it in the future could actually support future very innovative hospital designs. But okay, this is actually a different topic which we will not address today, obviously. Now, some next step activities that we are doing together with basically ESTECO and some key OEMs and infrastructure companies is to identify actually the most common, or let's say the most likely to occur cases. So in what I described earlier, we were mentioning that when we look at scenarios, we try to identify the most relevant scenarios. But what are the rare scenarios and the most likely to occur type of scenarios? And for this, actually, a number of activities are taking place. We are building actually some new algorithms that allow you to basically address those matters. Of course, if you would like to know more, please let us know. You can contact Dirk, you can contact myself. You will be shared my contact details. So thank you very much for your attention.